All right, so Mark, my first question for you is looking from now to the end of the year, what's the legislative priorities of the Trump administration? What do they want to see from Congress from here till the end of the year?
There's several things that we still need to get done. One is an appropriations process. You know, it's been 22 years since Congress completed appropriations bills by September 30th, and the consequence when they don't is these giant omnibus bills that you've heard the president give his displeasure with are dumped on his desk and say either you sign this or you shut down the government. So one's appropriations. Two, nominations. At this point, there have been more filibusters of our nominees by Democrats than any administration in history by a wide margin. In fact, the last 6 presidents in their entire first 2 years of presidency totaled 24 filibusters. So that's 12 years of the presidency, 24 filibusters. We've had 101 filibusters of our nominees in the first 15 months. So now there's 275 nominees sitting in the United States Senate. We need to get those guys confirmed. And 3 is you'll see the White House lay out a new tax plan that focuses more on making the individual rate tax relief permanent. As you know, in the last bill, the corporate relief was permanent, but the individual rate phases out. We want to make sure people are protected and give that rate to them permanently.
So on the permanent rates, is that going to be done before the midterm elections? Is that the goal? Is that the push right now?
It will be our push. I think it's more likely that we'll get a vote in the House, but it will set up, I think, people understand in November, this is one side that's trying to make the individual rate permanent in that relief. And those that vote against it, I think, will set them up for voters to understand what their interest is, which is, I think, often taking more taxpayer money and growing the government.
Now, when we look at the appropriations process, is the administration, the president specifically, pushing to reduce spending this time around behind the scenes? Is he trying to get Republicans to actually cut spending?
Just last night, the House of Representatives passed a rescissions package that cuts spending by $15 billion. It's the first rescissions package passed since the Clinton era, and it's one of the largest. So we're very pleased with that development. You'll see the president continue to push, particularly on the non-defense side, to reducing discretionary spending.
Now, he famously said, President Trump, during one of the debates, the debt at the time was $19 trillion. You need me to come in and straighten up that mess. That was his quote. What happened with the $1.3 trillion package? He signed it, but said he didn't want to sign it. What was happening behind the scenes? Did he want to sign it?
So to our first question, the reality is when Congress doesn't complete appropriations bills the president can sign or veto, you're left with one giant $1.3 trillion bill that says, here, you can sign and get things you asked for, like the first new funding for the border wall in 10 years, the largest buildup of our military, which the president was also a campaign commitment, funding for opiate addiction, things we'd asked for. You can either sign it or you shut down the government. The president said, this is my one chance to rebuild the military, as I promised the American people I would do. But it's also why we're asking the Senate to stay in through August to complete appropriations bills so the president can look at them individually and say, no, that spends too much in this area. I'm going to veto that. If you don't do that, you're left with a giant omnibus again, where basically Congress says, here, you sign or you shut down the government. That could be, if we're not getting individual bills done again, the president said he's not going to sign another omnibus like he did last time.
Now, do you think spending, defense spending, should be increased at all anymore until there's a full audit of the Pentagon? Because that's been discussed.
Yes, we're pushing for an audit of the Pentagon. The president's been behind that. But let's keep in mind a couple of things. This is what Secretary Mattis has told us he needs when he's fighting on multiple fronts. When we came in the administration, keep in mind that the war on terror remained and does still remain one of the primary issues for us. But we've reclaimed 99% of the property that ISIS had taken. So we've had enormous success there under Secretary Mattis. But he also said the looming threats we face in Asia is another priority for this administration. And so building up our military actually will help hopefully save us lives and costs in the future by not having war. If people respect the strength of the United States, we won't be going to war. And I think that is a cost that we should all bear so that we can avoid the larger cost of lost lives in the future.
And when it comes to undocumented immigrants, to illegal immigration, the Dreamers, what is the administration, the president specifically, doing with the Republicans on that issue? What's he pushing for to happen before the midterms or before the end of the year?
Our priorities remain the same as they were 6 months ago when we had this debate, which is we want to secure the border. We've asked for $25 billion. About 18 of that's for the wall, an additional $7 billion that helps to increase personnel and judges to help move deportation cases. We want reforms as well. these silly laws that if there's somebody is other than Mexican, they're released, or if people come across the border with children, a lot of that debate going on now about separation of parents and child, those are laws that have been on the books that basically tie the administration hands. We need that cleaned up. In exchange for that, the president said, I will take care of this DACA population, and I will support legislation that legalizes them. That, I think, is a common sense deal. The challenge we face is that Democrats believe they're winning in the courts right now on DACA. So they're not anxious to come to the table and actually negotiate. Until the upper courts actually overturn those cases, at that point, I think the Democrats will come and want to negotiate again.
There are some moderate Republicans who want the DREAM Act passed. Mm-hmm. They do want some border security tied to it, but it looks like it's probably not going to be a full funding of the wall. Would the president sign that if it actually made its way through with Democrat votes, a bill like that?
It's not so much what has Democrat votes. It's a question of what is the population of Dreamer? Is it limited to the DACA population, or is it vastly extensive of people who broke the law coming into our country? Number one. And number two, does it really provide funding for our border? In many cases, these Dreamer bills authorize dollars, which is a clever way to do this in D.C., but actually doesn't appropriate it. So Congress can say, I authorized it, but it's actually appropriating the dollars that makes the difference. And so we're not going to play that game. If they're not going to give us the resources we need, and if they're expanding that population well beyond the DACA population, the president's not going to sign that.
So beyond the 1.8 million, right, is the estimate right now?
What we pushed for was 690,000. Those are the number of people who actually have applied and gotten permits on DACA. Some Democrats said, well, what about those who are afraid to come out of the shadows who could have? And that's not where we wanted to go, but to get the things we wanted, we were willing to go a little bit farther. I don't think we're at 1.8. There's some people who are putting other plans out there. We've acquiesced above the 690, but it's not as high as 1.8.
Do you think that could hurt the Republicans in the midterms, trying to get a bill passed that does that legalizes and offers citizenship to DACA?
Quite the contrary. I think if it's actually making sure we're finally securing our border and making reforms that are permanent in our immigration system, I think it's helpful to us. If instead what you're saying is a simple bill that just provides amnesty for DACA population and doesn't do the other things, then yes, absolutely, that would be detrimental. But if we're doing things that secure our border and make real long-term reforms, then no, I think that is a plus for us.
Do you think Trump's base would be okay with that, doing the DACA legalization with some border security, and they'd be okay as long as it's tied in?
The question is when you say some border security, we want full border security. It's not just for the full funding of the wall, it's also for permanent reforms to the immigration system. So yes, those are, in our minds, critically important.